Amid the outrage about the astronomical price tag in the tub thumping of the Stop the Stadiums campaigners, the most significant question about Sydney's proposed $2.5 billion venue redevelopment has been lost. Ask not whether Sydney can afford better places to play rugby league, football and rugby. Ask whether the leagues who administer those sports and the clubs who play them deserve palatial new homes. More than a decade ago, as a Victorian working in the Sydney media, the plan now embraced by the New South Wales government seemed as obvious as the rain pouring through the roof at the Sydney Football Stadium. As I wrote then, the Olympic Stadium was famed for a few great moments but despised by week-to-week fans of all codes because of its lack of intimacy and atmosphere. Thus it must kick the AFL to the curbside and become a rectangle if it was to attract larger crowds for NRL and possibly A-League and Super Rugby games. The SFS and Parramatta Stadium were laughably outdated by contemporary standards, a common problem with the bland cookie-cutter stadiums built in the 1980s. Knock them down and build modern facilities that would not only cater for existing crowds but attract more fans and corporate clients. That it took so long for the New South Wales government and the various stakeholders to reach this seemingly obvious conclusion says much about the Byzantine nature of Sydney sports politics. The SCG Trust is mistrusted and the Sydney Olympic Park Authority lacks authority. Meanwhile, sports not only fight each other but also among themselves because clubs have opposing interests. The outcome: lots of grandstanding but few new grandstands. Then there was ingrained resistance of the Sydney public. The self-defeating arguments that Sydney has unique geographical problems, rugby league is a TV game, we've got better things to do and we love our suburban grounds, although we don't actually go to them. It was this can't-do attitude, even more than the governmental dithering and petty squabbling between stadium operators, that surprised me when I dared suggest Sydney fans deserved better stadiums. Back then, however, I assumed the various codes would unlock their potential or heighten demand and crowds would increase. Just as, Sydney sports fans will hate to hear, the AFL had done when it moved from relatively poorly populated suburban venues to impressive new or refurbished stadiums. There is compelling evidence that better stadiums help improve attendances. But even as the New South Wales government ticks every box on the stadium wish list, it is hard to make a case that the three codes that would benefit from redevelopment have done enough to grow their games and, in turn, justify such extravagant expenditure. The historic bungling by Sydney's three rectangular codes is exemplified by how the AFL's savvy lobbyists snatched the lion's share of stadium funding from under their noses. The NRL, FFA and RU, or their predecessors, stood by as the southern interlopers occupied the Olympic Stadium, won funding for the redevelopment of the SCG and built Blacktown Olympic Park, subsequently abandoned, and the Showgrounds Stadium. All while NRL clubs were getting meagre grants to put another lick of paint on crumbling suburban fortresses attended by relatively meagre crowds.